Call the meeting to order. We begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first item is the approval of minutes from our February 19th meeting. Do they have any major edits or comments? All right, so somebody move, we adopt the minutes. All in favor say aye. Aye. All right. So our main purpose tonight, among a lot of things, is to hear the Board of Education's proposed budget for the 2020 budget year, and questions and interchange on that, so I'll turn it over to Matt.
Great.
All right.
Good to see everybody. I can't believe we're back here again. It seems to go quick. But I know we provided the board with a lot of different presentations and background materials just to support this PowerPoint stack. It's about 10 slides, just trying to hit some of the high leverage items, and then certainly, as Rob, you referenced, answer any questions that you have. So Brooke's going to flip through it for me. But the first slide really is just kind of a framework that we plan from. I won't go through all of the bullets, but what we try to do each and every year when we start off in November with that three-board meeting is understand the context of the town locally, what's going on politically with the state in terms of the fiscal climate, and how we balance that with moving forward our school district within our own continuous improvement model. So we've listed some of those things that we're grappling with. Certainly I know some we'll talk about tonight as we go through the presentation. But this budget does support quality academic options for our kids, really that variety of programs. We do have a few new staffing proposals in there, offset by some reductions that we provided some background materials on that are listed there, and security improvements as well. So those are kind of the main high leverage areas that we'll be talking about tonight. So the budget overall is a 2.5% increase. We do have a little bit of new information that's come through since we presented with the Board of Ed that can move that number that I have on the last slide, but it represents an increase of $1.7 million, a total budget of $70,877,377. I know we've talked a lot about enrollment, so I won't get too deep into it, but this is just a one-year snapshot of what the projection looks like. A minimal decline overall of 17 students. So you see the offset of close to 60 decline at the secondary level, up at elementary a little bit, up at 7-8 level a little bit. But most importantly is the trend from that significant decline we've been talking about over the last decade has leveled out. Looks to be leveling out with our projections for the next 5 years, and then we should see a increase in enrollment over a 10-year period of roughly 7%. It's interesting, Neil and I, and we'll update you a little later in the presentation on the facilities and enrollment work, but we had an opportunity to look at the new demography from the other company that came in, and it shows some really interesting information, but a similar trend. The trend doesn't vary too far from what we have up on that slide. So. Per pupil expenditure, it's annual data that we roll out to our board and to the Board of Finance as well. It's an audited number. It's part of our fiscal reports that go to the state. You can see our positioning overall is pretty similar to what it was last year. I put some peer communities in just as a comparative in terms of their per pupil expenditure. And a little bit of budget history there. You can see a 10-year average of a little over 1.25% and a 5-year average of close to 1.4%. And again, as I said, we've talked a lot over the years about trying to separate ourselves as a school district by the program options that we provide for students. So rather than list them all out, we went with some pictures this year just to demonstrate some of our varied program opportunities. In this case at Simsbury High School, the wonderful theater program, culinary arts. We have really a blossoming engineering program that many students are taking advantage of, and a large variety of sports, one of the most varied sports programs in the state of Connecticut. So in terms of the drivers of the budget and big levers in the numbers, we'll talk about these three: the contractual obligations, some program improvements, and then the insurance and pension numbers. So this is the roll forward on the personnel side of things. Before we looked at any enrollment or any reductions, it's really the impact of moving the contracts forward. So you can see the different contracts listed there, the largest obviously being the teacher's contract, an increase of a little bit over $1 million or 1.55% to the operating budget. You see the two small, the administrative contract. SFEP is our second largest bargaining group. That's our non-certified staff, pretty much. It's our paraprofessionals, paraeducators, secretarial staff, positions like that. You can see the impact of our nurses contract, and then we hold dollars in reserve for unnegotiated contracts. So this year, that's our custodial contract, NAGE, our unaffiliated group, and then the third piece of that reserve dollar figure of $204,000 is our transportation contract. All told, rolled forward, it's a little bit over 2%. And then we actually have quite a few retirements this year. We have 10 that we've worked in here, a few more I'm going to talk about later on in the presentation. So we're able to reduce roughly $250,000 from that number, but a roll forward in personnel of 1.75%. So as Neil really drives a lot of the personnel work in our district, and he put his presentation together earlier, we really looked at different lanes we could talk about this year. So in terms of academic enhancements, we are adding an additional FTE for our elementary world language. That's a resource we pulled out last year with a retirement, with the agreement with our board that we would explore world language at the elementary level. That is one area in our kind of K-12 sequence where we're pretty far behind compared to what other districts do. Many other districts are starting their program in kindergarten, primary. We had historically started it in 5th grade. This will allow us to start it in 4th grade. So we have one FTE to support that program. The K-6 teacher that was enrollment driven there, that's the FTE we're actually going to be able to pull back out. So I'm going to skip over that one and talk a little bit later about why. The math intervention academic supports are a combination of really adding some hours to non-certified tutors at the elementary level, and then replacing a non-certified tutor at the middle school level that was grant funded previously. So it's all told about an FTE, I believe. Yeah. The second lane is safety and student support. So the top priority probably of all the requests was the social worker at Simsbury High School. We've seen a significant increase in need in mental health supports for students and families. And with 1,400 students, we have one social worker at Simsbury High School and really see the need to add a second resource there. Director of School Safety, we can provide a little more detail on that later if there are questions, but that's a resource that Neil has really managed the work in Burke under that window, and it's expanded significantly over the last 3 to 4 years in terms of mandates, managing staff, drills, working collaboratively with our police department. A non-certified computer technician for some of the additional Chromebooks at the middle school to help manage really the hardware that we've brought in, and some small dollars for after-school stipends, after-school clubs at the elementary level to engage our kids. Then we look at how we can offset those dollars. So 3 classroom teachers that are enrollment driven at Simsbury High School won't impact class size, allow us to maintain the same programming levels that we have now, would be a pretty significant reduction based on the 60 student decline in enrollment. We have transitioned from actually a person that managed our substitute caller system for many, many years to an electronic version of that. This captures the dollars in the budget that we save through that transition. And then there are 3 FTE and non-certified reductions between our paraprofessional staff and some of our other staffing due to retirements and turnover that we feel we'll be able to capture as we move throughout the end of the year and into the summer. We always do see some pretty significant roll in those staffing numbers, and we plan on capturing 3 of those positions. Overall, it looks like a net a little bit up. When we take that other FTE out, it's kind of nominally down just a little bit. So. Insurance, certainly, I know we're going to talk about this later on this evening. We have some historical information on the insurance up top, but down below, a little more importantly, is the increase of $500,000 or 0.72% to our budget. It's our second largest driver. This represents a 9% premium increase. I believe it was 9%, Burke, at this point in time. And then this is the sheet. I know it's a busy sheet, but it's where we roll everything in together and try to give you a snapshot of how we get to the 2.5% increase. So the top of this sheet under additions is the contractual information that we talked about before, with the program improvements or certified requests and the non-certified requests we just went through. Some smaller items you can see in utilities, building, maintenance, and technology. Burke can provide some detail on that as we go through the line item. Offset by the 10 retirements and the reductions we just worked through for a total increase of 2.5% to the operating budget. And then the new information we talked about before, after our Board of Education approved the 2.5, is we received 2 additional certified staffing retirements. And as you know, we do the offset between the retiring teacher salary going out in the mid-level higher to capture $25,000 in savings for each of those. And then our eligible kindergarten students, as we started looking at that number coming to fruition for kindergarten, lower than expected initially at Tooten Hills, and it does not look like we will require that additional FTE or kindergarten teacher that we thought we would. We'll continue to monitor the numbers, but at this point we feel it's a prudent decision to pull that back out, which would actually put us more in the 2.3% increase, which is about $200,000 off from the initial planning target that you provided us. Wanted to include just some information, a little bit of historical. I know there's many different levers we need to discuss tonight about whether it's teacher pension or some of the insurance information that will come, that we do have a current balance of $385,000 in the non-lapsing account. I've provided just a little bit of history, and I think Burke may have provided more in the background materials on how we've utilized these dollars in past years. We have utilized them. There's been years where we've just carried over the balance. There have been years where we have used them to offset operating expenditures to get to a target, and there are years where we did more of like a spend to save kind of concept, which was the first year with some energy projects. So a little bit of a historical on how we have utilized those funds, but those dollars are there for certainly for conversation as we move through. I know, Rob, there were some other things you wanted to talk about. I don't know if you want to stop there for questions on the operating, or how do you want to do it?
Why don't we go, let's go ahead and go through these. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
All right, I'm going to turn this to Burke. He's going to hit some updates on Henry James, where we are with the facilities planning, and some of the recent talk about regionalization of schools.
Okay, so Henry James, we got the local approvals at the start of the year. We got our state okay to go out to bid at the very end of January. So now, working with Downs Construction Company, we actually are sort of part of the process, but they're really leading the process, and the revised bid opening date is next Wednesday, the 20th. So there'll be a series of subcontractor type packages that they will bid out, and they would be looking to start before the school year is done with the exterior work, basically, and then really be focusing on the summer of 2019 throughout the school year of 2020, really finishing at the end of the summer of 2020. So we'll be meeting with the Public Building Committee once those bids are in and start to review the scope.
And then finished occupancy would be when? That
expected it would be that we would maintain occupancy throughout, but the completion date would be that fall start of the school year of 2020. But we'd actually be able to
Full
take
year of
occupancy
under
of
construction,
certain areas
but
earlier.
access to all the building that's available now.
Yes, and our principal and assistant principal have really worked closely with the construction managers to really look at the phasing of the project that would have to happen throughout. They've done a tremendous amount of work with that. Went ahead too far. So in terms of our facility master plan and reconfiguration study status, we had hired Tecton architects who began work just at the very end of I should say 2018. Just realized that December, and then would be finishing in the upcoming year. So they have gone through all of the buildings. They've done extensive site reviews with their team of engineers and other consultants. There's been a curriculum component where they have met with staff at all grade levels, and ultimately we're looking for an update at the probably the end of April Board of Education meeting will be the kind of their first interim update that will include a component, as Matt mentioned, of some of the enrollment data forecasting, but also kind of a larger picture. And then we would see that after that it would be time to restart the facilities and enrollment task force to do a little bit more in-depth conversation, but also start having public conversations about what their findings are and trying to get input.
So just to be clear, both those dates on the first line
Yes,
are wrong.
right.
It's
Literally just
18 and 19.
saw that as I was
Yeah, okay.
giving that presentation.
It's not a 2-year study.
So,
Right.
the third topic was legislation that has been quite large in numbers of various bills that seem to relate to regionalization type topics. We've highlighted a couple of these bills that I think people have seen perhaps the most conversation about, and one would basically say that you would need to regionalize if you have less than 40,000 residents, and suggest using something akin to the probate map. And the second one is targeted on smaller districts with less than 2,000 students. So these bills and several others, including one, I think two that relate to the governor's budget, have been in the education process of hearings that have taken place. We know that there was a lot of responses in writing that were submitted, as well as a lot of testimony. Have not got a sense that there's been a lot of public support, but ultimately we have got to stay abreast of what this legislation is. I think there's been there's some hearings Friday that there's been some other bills. Kevin shared with us that there was one that we informed ourselves on relative to giving taxing authority to regional districts.
Is that in the 738 bill? No.
No.
7319. So it's actually in front of the Planning Commission. It's not associated with these other bills. It's a different angle that they're attacking.
So ultimately, I think our Simsbury Public Schools point of view is we have been looking towards sharing services both within the town and Board of Ed, as well as for decades working with other school districts in both sort of formal and informal partnerships. So we've put together some information about some of that, and don't see that a state mandate that's coming and says, this is how you must do it, is probably the most productive way to do it, given that in this state we have, I believe it's 17 regional districts that encompass roughly 45 towns now, and those have happened over period of time when it made sense for those, for those towns. And over a period of time, we have engaged in programming with fellow districts, and it's something that it's obviously important to all of us. It's important to the boards. It's important to our taxpayers. So I just don't think that one size fits all types of thou shalt do it is really the best way for the state to mandate it. But we obviously are going to stay, watching closely of how these bills may progress. I've not heard that there's really any particular talk of something that would be forced to happen. It seems to be more hoping to incentivize.
Right.
So can you give a little bit broader definition of regionalization? Having not read the bills, you said shared services. Can you go into a little more depth, or
Well,
would
I
that
think
include shared facilities as well?
So these two bills in question are both about a page long. They're very brief in terms of concept, but they don't just make it easier to create these efficiencies or shared services. They do tend to say, you need to create a whole new structure. So what's stated in one page so simply, I think there's a lot more involved with that. And obviously, districts have created regional districts over a period of decades. So that's what those two kind of focus on. The other ones are much more, they're like 40-page bills that have different tentacles that kind of speak to, well, we would want to create a new shared services task group that would kind of study it, and it really picks around the edges. But the goal, appears to be to incentivize some of the sections that I've read that certainly make sense are how do you create more special education opportunities in sort of a regional basis. Well, those are exactly the types of things that Sue Lemke and I and our colleagues have been doing and are doing with programs that we run on a regional basis. One at the age 18 to 21 at the University of Hartford for students with transitional needs before they leave our care. And then there's also programs for students that have a sort of short-term diagnostic placement need, and that happens to be located right in Simsbury at Latimer Lane. So those are real-world examples of things we do to save outplacement tuitions and to have programs that we couldn't offer ourselves. So I'm sure that to the extent that we can find incentives that the state can help make it easier to do things, that's definitely what we want to be doing. But to just say that by creating a larger region and sharing the overall admin costs is going to somehow drastically reduce the costs, and gee, where does that leave our citizens with wondering what input they have about schools and will it affect their neighborhood schools? The way this just has kind of gotten out there in these sort of scattershot fashion doesn't really help people understand. I think generally people are concerned about how does it affect my
home school, home district,
my kid, and where would they go to school? I mean, even I have a high schooler who heard about, we're going to be combined with Avon, Canton, and Simsbury and Granby. Well, no, that's not exactly what this is really going to happen, but it's a concept is the way I see it. But does that really make sense? I think that's up to our town, and then to talk with our neighbors about what does make sense.
If I can interject from my experience, having been on the Education Committee in the legislature, not so much as Simsbury as an example, but there are examples of other towns that kind of drive people crazy. There are small towns where maybe all they have is a grammar school and the high school is regionalized, and by law they have to have a superintendent. So the administrative overhead for one little grammar school is like, really? Why don't you just blend with another town? You have towns even near us who are small, and I know Matt's actually talked with them in the past, who are small and have really tiny high school populations. And those kids, frankly, in my opinion, would be better served if they were at a combined high school where they'd have a bigger array of opportunities as we're able to provide our kids. So, there's some push in the legislature based on some of those kind of stories. And the one thing I'd say is get out in front of it, because, I know they've been talking about it for a while and it hasn't
Yeah.
become a mandate yet, but it's going to grow as a pressure over time. And so don't wait until you're pushed into it. Choose who you want to go to the dance with now, because you'll be better off if you can choose somebody that you want to work with, and who's a cultural fit for our town and for your school system. So, and I think there probably are some administrative efficiencies. There's some opportunities. You're not going to eliminate teachers, obviously, or even necessarily schools, but
Right.
amongst the admin, there's always a little of opportunity. So.
The Hartford Foundation for Public Giving just recently put out a report on when it makes sense to regionalize and when it doesn't. And really, the report says you're not going to find a lot of efficiencies. You may find some, but it's not the big dollars. And so in some ways, this is a distraction from solving the crisis of the state. And it's a good distraction because we're all talking about this instead of solving the crisis of the state. So there is a little bit of that. And there are a bunch of studies. Records did a study as well. So if you're doing it just to save money, you're probably not going to have the savings that we would all hope that would be the silver lining to solve the state crisis. There are other reasons to regionalize that people are talking about too, and sort of social equity issues, and how we
kids
live in a
better access.
segregated state, and how do we solve some of the broader issues that are out there, which are valid to talk about as well.
I just had, the regional school districts that exist now, they don't have taxing authority, right? They just, they have budgets, and the towns then fund based on property taxes from their own citizens.
Yeah,
So
correct.
the taxing authority thing is a real game changer, and I can't imagine that.
The bill Kevin was talking about, yeah.
Right, so
Yeah.
it's Bill 7319, and so it says the stated purpose is to require that local and regional school districts, and they define that as $15,000, 15,000 students or less, becoming a taxing authorities separate from any municipality for the purpose of providing educational services.
Yes, we won't have to do this next year. It'd be great.
Oh, unless it's an additional taxing
Oh.
authority.
Yes.
I mean,
Like the fire district.
what it does is
Yeah, that's what
Yes.
it would be.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
Obviously pulls the authority
Yeah.
for
But
educational services.
My point being, it would be hard to get that done in any real time. It's a major shift.
Right.
Yeah, you'll.
Yeah, keep in mind, for every 20 bills that are introduced, maybe a half of one gets passed.
Well, and these aren't even out of committee yet.
Right,
So,
That's my
these
point.
aren't really on the floor.
right.
I think Linda's advice is a good one, which is think about areas where we can be out in front of it, and I know we do that. All right, so is that it? So
Yep.
that-
That's it for those
So that
three.
would open us then for questions about the budget and line items. I know our board knows this, but for the people listening in, the Board of Ed budget is a budget where we approve the entire amount. We don't have line item authority, but we have the ability, before we recommend the Board of Ed budget, to look at it and ask questions and be sure it's appropriate in every respect, because our role is to take care of the purse strings and to think of the taxpayers that pay the bills. All right, who wants to start?
I guess I'll just ask one question. So the budget drivers, that obviously doesn't include the proposal that we assume 25 or 36% of the TRS, teachers' retirement?
Does not. Correct. Yeah. Which the
Lives in the town.
amount year one is not 25%.
Right,
It's the
it-
year
it's a-
three
it would
amount.
be-
It's
they're saying
like
that would be a
200-something
phase in
thousand
after.
dollars,
Right,
phase
and after
in.
3 years, it'd be $1 million.
$1 million.
Right, and so I'm assuming they're basically saying everybody's responsible for 25%, and then anything you pay above and beyond the median salary
Yes.
is you're responsible to pay.
Is an additional, right.
Additional
yes, an
pay on
additional.
top of the 25%.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think you've seen that data, I believe.
Yeah.
Kevin, I think that's actually in the Board of Selectmen's budget because of the way it's structured through the state, because, and Maria, can you confirm that?
Yeah, please sit down.
So the governor's proposed budget was released a few days before my budget was due to the Board of Selectmen. Amy and I did confer with Rob, and we thought that it would be best to at least include it at that point in the budgeting process. So what we did is, for budgeting assumptions, we used the governor's proposed numbers on revenue. We are anticipating, based on his numbers, a slight increase to our ECS grant. The net impact of the teacher's retirement system assessment under his proposal, with the slight increase in revenues, was an impact of around about $245,000. So for the purposes, again, for showing it within the budget, we showed it essentially as a separate item. At this point in time, we haven't been able to ascertain from the proposal whether or not the town would receive the bill, whether the Board of Education would receive the bill. So we showed it similar in a way to debt service, how we itemized that as a separate item, but it's sort of in our preliminary projections in terms of estimating, how that might impact the mill rate. And again, for revenue projections, we did incorporate those numbers.
So it's outside the Board of Ed budget, but
this
it's
Somewhat.
considered as we look at the overall impact. And just, which is a good point, because tonight we're looking at the expense budget for the Board of Ed, and then we'll hear the similar next week for the Board of Selectmen, and we'll look at capital, and then we'll come back and look at our taxing and revenues, and it's an iterative process.
Yes, and just for consistency, I want to point out that page 6, which is one of those pink colored pages with the revenues, we've used the governor's budget also there, so you see the projected slight increase in ECS that the town would receive, but we also footnoted that teacher's retirement contribution down there, and we also noted what the second year of the biennial budget contribution would be if the governor's budget is passed.
Okay. So that was one of my questions, actually. So that's on page 6, where down at the bottom, it says actual funding was $6 million, and we had budgeted for $5.4 million. So that's a favorable variance from what we had thought would happen. Right? About 600,000. 640 some thousand.
And that's right, that's 17-18 versus the current year, 18-19.
Well, it says actual for 18-19.
Right.
And then budget
Right,
for
but
18-19.
right, we had, right, I just meant from the what we were expecting coming out of the
Where's he saying
17-18 year.
actual?
Right.
We actually
Okay.
received
All right.
more in 18-19.
Okay. Kevin, do you have anything else or particular? Maura?
Nope.
Linda?
Well, I have 10,000 questions, so why don't I let everybody else go
Okay.
first?
All right.
As usual, sorry.
Well, Huh?
I'll defer.
I have a couple just little specific ones that make my head scratch. So the general control account is up by $200,000, but that's all in the reserve for unnegotiated contracts. It just seems to me like every year we have that amount, so why wouldn't we compare the general control last year with the general control this year? Or alternatively, if we settled those unnegotiated contracts, where those salaries then must be in the actuals.
So so that's what we've done for the 18-19. They've moved to the various appropriate lines. But to give a year-over-year, there's some years where we have a larger contract that's.
So let me ask the same question a different way. How much did we estimate or reserve for unnegotiated contracts last year?
300 something.
I had
And then what was the actual outcome of the negotiation? So how did we do versus what we
Oh,
reserved?
maybe it came in.
I recall reporting on that last year, and we were fairly close. I don't have the latest year-over-year numbers.
I
so
think it was
So if I can
176.
Add to this question, because this was also one of mine, and I may be connecting the dots inappropriately, but I believe general control is defined mostly as administrative
Right.
cost and administrator salaries. And the cover page says that administrators are getting a 2.3% raise, so that's a known thing. That's not an unknown thing.
Right, that's already in those appropriate lines.
And so that's in the 9, so how much of the 9% increase is due to the 2.3% increase of the administrators, which is, kind of much higher than all of the other increases? Salary
So,
increases.
then I'm just trying to follow which line you're talking about. So, on page 10, out of the total general control group, you
You're on green
you have
pages.
an increase of 9.04%.
Right.
So that's what you're talking about. So,
You've got to
what
find
I'm
the green pages.
the
Yep, got 'em.
Yeah, I'm
The question that I heard is maybe not what you meant, but in terms of our administrative group, where we have a settled contract, that is not in this reserve here. That is in the appropriate section of the instructional group 2. So that's where we have salaries for principals and directors.
And administrators.
But there are non-certified administrators who are not in a union, and there's a few of us in this room primarily who are in that. Our settlement has not been. There is no known for next year, so that's why it's in this reserve. There's not a collective bargaining agreement for us, so there's not a known settled contract. So every year.
But you have a number in the cover page.
That's for the administrative union.
That's just the
Oh,
union. So there,
okay.
that's in
So that's your
that-
principals,
that's in-
assistant principals, yeah.
It's in that next section. It's actually the first line item, salaries, principals, and directors. That's the bulk of it in that line item, okay?
Okay.
I think it would be helpful to have the number that you had in there last year, because there was a budget for it. So we
Comparative
could
number.
compare
Yep.
it,
Yeah.
And then, to take it a step further, I'd love to see the allocation of, we might not be able to see that, but in terms of the allocation of that number. So I think Linda said it was roughly 176,000 last year. De minimis
Portion it out,
increase.
yeah.
What is it? Or, where did it go?
And last year, because I always crosswalk on nerd that I am, multiple, I keep all of these notebooks and peruse them again. So it went up 10% last year as well, and 9% this year. So it's like one area that seems to be like growing.
I think it's not, and that's why I think it's
Am I
just
wrong?
yeah, I think it's
Don't
just
think that's
presented.
it's not over the.
Yeah,
It's not apples and oranges
Right.
year to
not over
year,
the same
correct?
base to-
You kind of need what Derek's talking about, I think,
Yeah,
to
one of the
see how
things-
it
I don't
It's
like
just
the
not clear. I'm just
I don't like
looking
the
at the-
presentation.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, one of
Yeah.
the things I had mentioned to
I get
Brooke earlier is, could we see next year's budget? Can we see what was budgeted? You guys do mid-year adjustments, and you're showing the mid-year adjustments, so you're not showing what we saw last year, and then actuals, and then we can do a bucket-to-bucket comparison. And I think that would just
Yeah.
eliminate a lot of the questioning,
Right.
make your lives easier.
The actuals are on a different page, so you got to take it all apart and crosswalk it. It's really a pain.
Got it.
Well, I guess if this is zeroed out, can you find, if this is truly the 18-19 budget, then all one of these line items.
Maybe I'd ask this of Neil. I did notice that, there was improvement of the number of classes that are within the range versus over or under, but I also noticed that we changed the range, which accommodated some of by lowering the range from 22 to 18. There are a lot less that are under the range.
Correct.
So just give me a thought process. How did we determine that it was appropriate to do that?
Same question for me.
Partly through discussions that we've had at this meeting
Yeah.
over the years, talking about that range and the fact that there are truly numbers that we hit where when we divide it, we can neither divide that particular number either to fit within the range.
Yeah.
That whichever way we divide it, whether it's by 2 or by 3, if we divide it by 2, it's going to be above the range, and if we divide it by 3, it's going to be below the range.
I get all that math, and this,
Thus to present,
Yeah.
and at one point, the question was, perhaps that's a policy thing that the Board of Ed needs to look at. So the policy committee looked at it and kind of broadened the range to make make it that these were not irresponsible decisions. They are decisions within a budgeted amount that you sort of don't have a choice on. And yet what we were doing is you take a number that you don't have a choice on, and I'll use an example of 52 students. If I say I'm going to turn 52 students into 2 sections, I'm reporting that it's 2 oversized sections. If I take 52 students and divide it by 3, I'm reporting 3 undersized sections.
I completely get that.
Yeah. Right.
All right, and so the follow-up question would be, are our target ranges similar to other communities of our size? And
So part of our policy review was to put the policies of peer districts in front of the policy committee. So we looked at class size policies from Avon, West Hartford, Granby. Everybody's a little different, but we certainly we're not out of a norm.
Okay, and then my last point really is that I truly, truly hope that part of what we're getting for the $200,000 we're paying Tectron is for them to look at the optimal mix of schools and classrooms by size, so that when the math isn't 52, but it's
Correct.
80, and the math gets a lot bigger when you have 4 classes, right? The math for that range gets a lot better. And I know that's a very controversial thing to say.
Yeah.
But that's your squadron line to Terrifil
Exactly.
comparison.
Yeah.
We get
Understood.
almost all the squadron line classes
Right up
within
against it.
range.
Yep.
Bingo, right?
Correct.
Because it's how many students.
Correct.
Yeah, so I just want to be sure that we're all in the same, that we understand that math and what the implications of that are broadly.
Yep.
All right.
Can I build on that
Yeah.
topic? I mean, it's a topic we've been over
Yeah.
every year for several years, I know. So, but some of it may be the semantics of what words you're choosing, because you're calling it a target. And to me, a target means you're going to hit the target. Sometimes you're going to slop over on the top, sometimes you're going to slop over on the bottom.
You don't
And-
call it a range.
But it's a target range.
Yeah.
And what you're treating it as is a ceiling. So in your example of 52, the target range is 18 to 25, or I guess it's now 16 to 25, or whatever it is. But 25 is the top of the range. You could be over by 1 and have 2 classes of 26. Or you can be at 3 classes of 14, which is way below that.
Correct.
No, so why aren't we, sort of edging on one side equally to the other? If it's really a target and not a ceiling, then
So-
I would say you could have, and the quality of education for a class of 25 versus 26 is not going to change.
Right. So I don't
the
think
cost
we,
is.
Yeah, I don't think we use it as a ceiling, because the year before's data would show you that we had, the number was either 10 or 11 classes above.
Yeah.
Slightly above.
Yeah.
The budget was very difficult. We had some pressure at the end of the summer, where in another budget year, we might have made different decisions, and we didn't budge.
Yeah.
We said, no, this is, we did have classes of 26, 27 kids. And quite frankly, as the Board of Ed members know, when you have the class of 26 or 27, you're going to get a lot of Simsbury parents at the Board of Ed meeting talking about what that experience is for their students' class. So we know that oversized classes will bring the public out, and it does across all 5 schools at the elementary level. And so we watched this year. We had 4 classes where it was not a ceiling. It was, in all those cases, one student above, and we held to above the guideline by 1 student.
Yeah.
When you get to 2 or 3 students above, we tend to make the decision that we are gonna make another class, and we make those decisions sometimes very late in the game, as late as August. We do not make those decisions after a school year starts. We have if a and that happened this year. The one class at Tooten Hills that is above the range did not go above the range until after Labor Day. We had a lot of pressure from parents to add a section even after the school year had started, and instead what we did was put some extra tutorial support into that grade level to support those students.
Okay. That's it for me. It's you,
Lisa?
Lisa?
Yeah, I just have, first of all, I want to thank both Burke and Matt, who made themselves very accessible to all members of the Board of Finance, and just how appreciative I am of that open access. It really answers some, we're able to answer some very simpler things, so we don't have to draw this out. The one question I did want to ask is about the security position. I know that the Board of Selectmen recently decided to expand its administrative level at the police department, adding 2 lieutenants, and the recommendation probably next year is going to be a chief. So going from 3 administrative to 4. And is there an opportunity in the security position to have a conversation with the SROs and the police department about perhaps a shared position, or have you talked with other districts about sharing that position? I just wonder if that might be an opportunity to explore, and whether it had been explored, and whether you could speak to that as a possibility or an option, or something you've already done.
I mean, I'm aware of their proposal. I have not had specific conversations with Maria or Nick about the roles and responsibilities and how they could translate. I don't think we're ever opposed to having those conversations, but I'm honestly sitting here not familiar enough with how that job description's bulleted out relative to what we need. I did talk to Nick at great length about our position, because I felt it was important to know if the law enforcement would be in support of that in terms of communication and collaboration, and he was, but I didn't have the conversation the other way.
So I don't know about, I just happened to see that watching your board meeting. I don't know if it was this week, or I don't remember when I saw it, but I wasn't aware of that. So I just thought, oh, and then I saw your proposal, and I'm thinking, I wonder if there's a synergy there. So just something to think about.
See, one of the benefits of going last is that everybody's asked all questions that I already had, so I only have a couple left.
Excellent.
Good plan. The page about Medicaid, I have to ask, just being a former Medicaid director. So I'm glad to see you're doing this and maximizing revenue. So I'm just wondering how that flow works. Does the funding come back into the Department of Ed, or does it go directly to the town? And are you fully utilizing it for kids in special ed? Because there's really lots of opportunity for...
That's the special ed presentation? Is that the tab you're under?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the second fiscal year I believe we have been doing this, and essentially the understanding how we set it up with the town was it's essentially like a grant. So the dollars that come in get tracked as if they are a grant, so we can spend against it. The dollars have been fairly small so far. There's a lot. Sue Lunke and her staff, have really had to drive the process of getting the permission forms. Is that the right word?
It is paperwork intensive, that's for sure.
From parents to share that data.
Yeah.
And so that is an ongoing process with Sue and her team. So that's one of the reasons why you have a smaller group of people who we're getting reimbursements for. And we're hoping that will grow, but there is a considerable amount of staff time. And not to be cynical, but this it was something we were looking to do, but it became a mandate of the state because they get half of the dollars without doing any of the work.
Right.
So that's where a lot of smaller districts are really struggling to say, is this something that's worth the staff time?
So is it worth the time?
But this new processing amount has added burden to a lot of Sue's staff. Some of our business office staff, Kira Sheen is also key in that, and so we're still giving it the positive thought that this will grow over time, but we're doing a lot of work for very minimal dollars so far.
Yeah. We started doing this in Medicaid, 20 years ago, with the big cities who had real clinics in there. in their schools, school-based health centers, and then expanded it over time. And for schools that have a lot of special ed kids or, a lot of sick kids, it does help, but I'm not sure if I know you have a high special ed population, so hopefully it will offset some of your
Yes,
health budget.
over time.
Over time. But yeah, I get it that it's a lot of work getting it set up and getting used to it. Then I had a question, and it's just an educational question for me and perhaps the rest of us. I was reading about your vision for bringing Chromebooks to more and more kids all the way down to the kindergarten through second grade. And I'm just reading in the popular press about the dangers of too much screen time, especially for little kids, and that kids need to be running around and moving more and not tied to computers all the time. And so I'm just sort of wondering, and I haven't listened, so I'm sure you guys have debated this a lot, but maybe you could just educate us a little bit about, do we really want kindergarten kids glued to Chromebooks?
Don't want them glued.
Little hyperbole there.
Access to that information, shifts in programs, ability to really differentiate instruction can be done pretty quickly and easily through the technology. But I agree, it's a balance, Linda, in how we do that. So certainly it's not turning over the whole program that it's delivered that way. But we've absolutely, with the high school one-to-one initiative and the accessibility of that and the user-friendliness of that, first and foremost want to move that down to the middle school. And then it's kind of building over time, but it's not an exact replica as we move.
The state does
really
testing too on computers, and so kids really have to have, to be global, you have to have some comfort level with computers in the first place.
And we found, Sue, with some of our special needs
They get it.
programs and really modified technology, it's really helped with some of the smaller kids.
I mean, without fully knowing, but it's limited as to what you can access on this Chromebook, right? I mean, that has to be. So I think, well, I won't go off on a soapbox, but I would say that's the least of our worries in terms of screen time, and it probably leads to, an increase in this, I mean, I work for Cigna. One of the big initiatives there is loneliness, and I think screen time in other forms probably has more to do that. I mean, my daughter uses a Chromebook, one of them at least now, and I think the Google Classroom is fantastic.
And that's the accessibility piece, right? Everything is done through that,
And,
paperless.
Papers are due by a certain time, everything is uploaded, it's easier for the teachers to grade and get grades
Immediate
back to
feedback, right?
the kids, so I'm in support of the Chromebooks, so long as it's limited access and it's really for
So
school.
we're adding social workers because the kids are suffering depression and
Well, that's because they've all got cell phones and on
Yeah,
Snapchat
too
and
much screen
Instagram and
time,
all those
yeah.
other things. That has not, I don't think it has to do with Chromebooks.
That's another
Issued by,
conversation.
yeah.
Okay.
So just a separate question
I just
on the
wanted to-
insurance and pension, page 10 verses 11. So it says 500,244. I'm assuming that number really should be down in the lower section where it says 492,244. So
So-
it's just an $8,000
The
increase.
pension.
Yeah, so
Right,
that's
so
just,
it's not at
that's
$500,000. This isn't separate than this.
correct,
It's just-
correct.
Right, right, right.
It's
Just
it's
a-
a
okay,
very,
okay.
it's
Thank you.
almost saying the exact same thing, but this, with that addition of the small increase in the defined contribution pension.
Okay, $8,000.
Good catch.
Not $500,000. All right, thank you.
We read these things.
That's pretty good.
All right. Any other specific questions on the book, or all in all? I'll echo what Lisa and others have said. When I read it, I thought it was a very thoughtful budget, the way you put it together. We were able to focus on the things you were highlighting as new initiatives. I thought that we all know what the big drivers are, but so I thought overall it was a good effort. I think before we respond in total, though, we need to talk about the other two sort of big drivers, some of which are yours, some of them are Eric and Maria's collectively, but that we need to have a concept of so that we can set the overall budget and mill rate for the town. So let's move to the insurance topic, and
Switch?
yeah. So Amy and Maria have done a lot of work on this, and it's still somewhat of a work in process, but yeah.
Bullshit. Yeah. You didn't need to change schools, so yeah. Put my classroom out there.
Yeah, right. So we didn't rehearse this, but how should we approach this topic, Amy? So,
Unofficial plan is I was going to take you through the history of the fund.
okay,
And then Maria's going to take you through what was presented to the Board of Selectmen last night.
okay. And you provided those things to us in our packet.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you want to turn to the page, it says Town of Simsbury Health Insurance Fund, Statement of Revenues, Expenditures and Changes in Fund Balance, Fund History. And it has 2014 actual.
Was that?
Is there another copy of stuff down
I
there?
don't have a packet.
Do you need a packet, Moira?
I need a packet, actually. Thank you. This was the other thing. I didn't.
In 20 years.
Thank you.
Could we slide the mic over here?
Mr. Chair, yeah.
Tug on it a little bit.
This one?
Yeah. Close. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, everybody's on the page? Okay.
Yep.
All right, so if we'll start over at the left, where you can see you have your 2014 actual, and just going down the column, you show that you'll see the fund revenues, and then under that, you'll see your fund expenditures. And then there's a section here for any transfers into the fund, and then it shows your net change in your fund balance, also known as your income or your loss. And then you have your beginning fund balance, and then your corresponding ending fund balance after the change during the year. So just to take you through pretty quickly, you'll see that in fiscal year 14, we had a loss in the fund of about $97,000. In 2015, we had a loss in the fund of $1 million. In 2016, we had a surplus in the fund of almost $500,000. But if you look at the line right above it, you'll see that the only way that we achieved this was through a transfer in from another fund of $900,000. And then in 2017, you'll see that we had a loss of $486,000. And again, we had another transfer in of the $600,000, so that loss would have been over $1 million. And then in 2018, we had a loss of $851,000. So as you can see, from 14 to 18, we've had a loss in the fund every single year with the exception of 2016, and that was only through the assistance of a transfer in. So each year, we have our revenues not exceeding our expenditures, and therefore the fund is considered insolvent.
It's just that it's such a shock because the data that we got in December of 2017, a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, was the complete opposite. I mean, what he's said then was out of the last 10 cycles, you know, our recent claim experience was less than expected, and only one time in 10 years was it over, and that our cumulative claims have been $3 million below expected, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm having a hard time sort of crosswalking the two numbers. How did two people come up with such different answers using the same information?
So I honestly don't know, and I can't speak for the prior consultant. We weren't here. But what I can tell you is this information has all been in the audit and has all been traced to the audit. So it is actual information from the general ledger that has been verified.
So just a couple of questions. So some of the line items in both revenues and expenses have changed. And I just want to be sure we understand the ins and outs of that. So in 16, we start doing drug reimbursement. But, you know, $300,000. So why was there none of that in 14 and 15? Was that a change in what we provided? Was that contractual?
It probably wasn't a change in what we provided, so we get money back from prescription reimbursements from Cigna. So I'm guessing that's when that program started, was 16.
Okay. And what are insurance refunds?
These are the claims that were reimbursed that go above the stop loss.
They go against the stop loss?
They go above the stop loss, yes.
They go above the stop loss.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again.
And so then if you look at the stop, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Well, no, it's just because, again, I mean, I actually went back and watched the presentation that this guy did, and he said, you know, oh, you only had 3 claims that were over 200,000 last year, and only one of them hit the stop loss. But, you know, here you're showing a you know, significant amount. So, I mean, it's like.
So when you say this, so this 2018, is that January to January or fiscal?
No, that's fiscal year 18.
Fiscal 18, so they've ended in June. And then we have in 18, the HSA is an income and an expense
Yes,
offsetting?
yes.
Okay, so that doesn't impact this. So the premiums went up from 17 to 18 by $1 million, and the claims went up by $700,000. And then all of a sudden, we're paying for the stop-loss insurance for $420 in 18.
It looks like, so if you look at 17, that $900,000 seems really high. It almost looks like that stop loss was included as part of that number in 17.
Well, actually, it looks like the ASO fees and admin fees are a function of how many claims are filed, or the amount of claims. It's almost, well, without doing the math, it looks kind of lockstep.
Oh, so you're saying that if
Right.
you add those two together, that's similar, and then you
Right.
take out the HSA.
What is the stop-loss insurance? Why are we paying it now?
I think it's,
420.
what,
Yeah.
300,000, claims of 300,000 and over, or something like that?
Sure. So
250.
currently, stop loss is $275,000 for an individual claimant. That includes medical and prescription combined. We do not carry aggregate stop loss for the pool as a whole.
And Burke just confirmed that the stop loss was included as part of the ASO admin fees as it was purchased from them
Okay.
previously.
All right. So that, yeah, so, and then you take out the HSA in and out. Our expenditures were 14,000,001, and our income was 13,250,000, and so we lost $850,000.
Oh, I see that.
So, our claims are too high.
Yeah, stop getting sick, everybody.
Or our premiums are too low.
Yes.
Yes.
That's, yeah.
So I'm going to tell you what I think we should do. I have chatted with a couple of people about this, but it seems to me like we should set the premiums to match our claims experience, our best effort to do that with the help of our consultant. So there are no dramatic changes in population here, right, or of people covered. There's no huge difference one period to the other. But we're not, if we were an insurance company, we'd go out of business. We're self-insuring for this, right?
Yes, correct.
So we need to charge higher premiums.
Right.
And the employees pay a percentage of those.
That's correct.
All right. So what does our consultant tell us where we should be? Forget where the reserve is. Let's just talk about what their forward-looking premiums should
So-
be relative to where we were.
That's
Just
actually-
in actual dollars.
That is actually a really good segue into, if you pull up the
Yeah.
updated
All right.
sheet that I brought,
Yeah,
Maria's going to take you through it.
that's this one with the blue at the
Something
bottom.
you just handed out,
Yes.
or was it in the packet?
It was at your place when you were here. Do you need another one?
This?
Yes.
All right, good.
Great, thank you. So right, again, the challenge that we have here is that premiums have been set too low. And so the amount that we're collecting in premiums, both the employer and the employee share, haven't been covering actual claims that we've been incurring. And so, working with our consultants, we had a preliminary projection for the budget initially of 9%. We knew we were challenged in current year. We knew we were looking challenged moving forward. We were also trying to wait and get February claims in to get a better handle on this. And then as we started to sort of unravel the historical insolvency of the fund, again, working with our consultants, we've developed 4 scenarios, essentially a range. So if you look at scenario one would reflect the low end of the range for expected claims. And that would also build reserves to a short-term target of $2.8 million. We do want to say that the long-term target for our reserve would be about $3.6 million. Typically, you'd want to be in the range of 12 weeks of expected claims to 24 weeks of expected claims. And that, again, is about $3.6 million. Again, under...
The 3.6, is that 12 or is that 24?
That's 12.
Okay.
Right, so in the long term,
12 weeks.
yeah, so in the long term, we would want to try and get to about 3.6, but again, understanding in the short term with the challenges and not having premiums set
So
at
that's including IBNR.
the
Yes, the
3.6,
reserve,
yes,
yes.
correct. Yep. Right. So looking at a short term of getting at least to 2.8. So again, scenario one would reflect about a 10.44% increase in premium, but again, that's also reflecting the low end of the range of expected claims. If you look at scenario two, that's reflecting about a 21.28% in premiums. And that would be reflecting the mid-range of expected claims and also building reserves to the short-term target. Scenario three reflects a 32.12% increase in premiums. That would be reflecting the high end of the range for expected claims and building reserves to the short-term target. Scenario four, which is a 14.48% increase, would be reflecting the mid-range for expected claims, but that does not help build the reserves to the short-term target. So what we presented last night to the Board of Selectmen is we did present these 4 scenarios. In our professional opinion, we stated that we believe that scenario 1 or 4 would be the most prudent. But, however, if we were to use scenario 1 and 4, it would require some sort of transfer in addition to those premium increases to help build up the reserve.
Maria, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Scenario 4 was the mid-range. What was scenario 1 again?
Scenario 1 is the low end of the range of expected
With
claims.
a contribution toward?
With building, in theory, to fund balance, right? But we do think that that's rather risky to simply look at the low end of the range. And so for Amy and I, we recommended to the Board of Selectmen that, ultimately, if we were to pursue scenario 1 or scenario 4, we do believe that the fund, in addition to those premium increases, would need an expected reserve contribution. And that could either be a contribution from fund balance, or perhaps it's a contribution from fund balance with perhaps maybe year-end revenues this year. Maybe it's also year-end revenues next year, but that it would need an additional infusion.
For how much, Maria?
Sure. Scenario 1, there's an expected reserve contribution of about $1.488 million. Scenario 4 would be about $934,000. And again, when we looked at the overall budget, and we're going to be talking and speaking to debt service and capital in a bit, we do have some significant mill rate drivers this year. So obviously, this health insurance increase is a very significant cost driver for both the town and the board budget. Debt service was increasing this year by about 21%. It's about an $850,000 increase. So again, that's a very significant cost driver for us. That's about 0.4 mils. So looking at some of these very significant cost drivers from a budgetary perspective, we felt that scenario 1 or scenario 4 might be the most sort of steady or gradual way to try to help get the premiums to where they need to be.
Debt service increase is because of?
That's existing debt service, and that number this year was going up by about $850,000, or about a 21% increase.
Maria, it wasn't just existing. We had the gap, so it was a one-time spend. That was that green hashtag. That hasn't been part of our debt service. That was just instead of us lowering the mill rate. And we talked at the tri-board about that was a possibility to go to all to cash or.
That doesn't include cash. That is just debt service. Our debt service payment will be up about $850,000 this year.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
But the full cash to get to the 6.7, that's even more.
Right.
Yes.
All right, so I'm gonna try to unscramble this omelet and take this one step at a time so that
Sure.
we get to where we need to be.
Sure.
So I think the taking the low or the high is inappropriate for claims, the projected claims. Mid is appropriate. I think that's what we've tried to do in the past and we've missed. Or maybe we've used low, or maybe we've under-targeted for the reserve. But I would say, from my perspective, we should try to have a expense line item for premiums that matches our projected claims experience in the middle of the range. Then separately, we should establish where we want the reserve to end at the end of the year, and either get there by making that an expense item, adding to the projected claims experience, or fund it up front from our general fund. But we need to be at something like 12 weeks of reserve. Now, last year, we put $1 million in at the beginning of this year, trying to get to that. And I guess that money is gone because we were really losing about $1 million a year, claims versus premiums. Is that, it's in that range, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So I think that's some combination of 1 and 4. I think in 4 you have some buildup in the reserve, or no?
Yeah.
No.
So scenario 4, that 14.48% would not build up reserve. So that's why we recommended that if we were to use the 14.48%, additionally, we would recommend an additional $934,000
It's the
contribution.
number at the very bottom?
Exactly. And similarly, with the scenario 1, the 10.44%, again, we believe that would be on the low side.
Okay.
So we would recommend the additional reserve contribution.
So if we used 4 plus the 984, or 934, we would end the year at what level of reserves?
Sure. So that's the,
2.8.
yeah, the 2.8. So what we were working with was a short-term target reserve of 2.8 million. Again, to
With a
sort of gradually
long-term
build
goal
this.
of 3.6?
About 3.6. Yeah.
So if you, scenario 4, if you want to think of it the way the 14.48% increase makes your fund solvent, and then the 934,000 increases your reserve to the short-term target.
And what would we start the year with as a reserve?
1.877,
Where's that number? Okay, that's the number at the end.
yes.
And that represents how many weeks of claims?
8.5.
I think it's 8.5.
So, one thing I would ask is, if it's at all possible, to go back and talk with Bob Lindbergh, because I think he had different assumptions about what's an appropriate reserve level. And there are different opinions amongst different people about that. And I don't want us to overreact. I mean, if you go back and listen to his thing, he said you need basically a month of IBNR and a month worth for reserves. And then there's another 300,000 or 400,000 for this, he had a term for it, but it's kind of daily working capital for Cigna. But that's less than, you're now telling us we need 3 months minimum, which is more than, and so I think that's maybe part of the difference in what we're hearing. Like, all of a sudden we have a new consultant who's saying, oh no, you need a lot more reserves. And I want to feel comfortable. This isn't a comment about you guys. You guys are top notch and I'm thrilled with you, but we've had several different people in your jobs over the years, and we get different messages all the time, and I don't want us to overreact to every message, like, oh, today we need, $8 billion, and tomorrow, oh, we have too much, let's give some back, which we've already experienced. So I just don't want to be whipsawed, overreacting in one direction, and, I think if we could talk to both sides and hear the difference, maybe we don't need to do quite as much as what you're saying. If we do, then we have to do it. But I want to feel more confidence, because right now we're hearing two different people said two different things, and I don't know which one to believe. So maybe if we look back or look at some sort of best practices, standards in the industry. I mean, there's loads. I haven't done the research. I used to know this stuff off the top of my head, but there are, industry standards based on the size of the employer for what kind of, size reserves and how many weeks of IBNR and all of that stuff that you need. It's like many things. As I said to Burke today, you ask 6 different doctors their opinion, you'll get 6 different diagnoses. It's kind of the same thing with these guys. So I think we have to have some moderation and not necessarily overreact.
I think Maria can speak better to the reserve portion, but as far as the fund in and of itself, it is insolvent, and that is an issue, and which is the state of emergency, if you will, not the reserve level, because we do have reserves of 1.8. Are they ideal? Probably not. But the issue is the solvency of the fund right now, not so much the reserve.
Right.
Right. Agreed. I mean, I think the critical issue is the insolvency. I would absolutely concur with Amy's opinion on that. In regards to the reserve, this is something I had extensive experience in managing a self-insured pool of a very similar size for over a decade. And the advice I have always received from consultants I've worked with, Milliman, Lockton, is that sort of that target area is the 12 to 24 weeks. So I can't speak to what Simsbury had been advised in the past. I can only speak to my professional experience with managing a self-insured health insurance fund and advice I've received formally as well as currently from our benefits consultant. We would also recommend at some point in the future as a future project for this board is we do have a sample policy, but I do believe we should have a health insurance fund policy, particularly speaking to our target level of reserves as well as when a fund transfer may or may not be appropriate. So if we were ever, say, to exceed that 24 weeks of expected claims, okay, then at that point, then maybe it would be a conversation about a transfer to, say, perhaps OPEB or something of that nature.
I mean, we took money out of this fund a few years ago based on
Yeah, that's what I don't
the
understand.
feedback that we were rolling in dough. And so it just doesn't feel good. It's very frustrating to have been told totally opposite things in a short period of time.
The other thing, I mean, I went back and looked at our percent increase on the major medical expenditure line, and it's been all over the place. In 2014, it was 0. Then in 2015, it was negative 510. That's when we did the transfer, when we were rolling in dough. After that, it was a 410. In 2017, it was a 17.9%. And then last year, Maria and Eric, you gave us a 2.8. So it just seems like I think Linda's right. We don't understand how this is changing so much up and down, and where our advisor was, and it would be helpful to talk to Bob Lindbergh and sort of see what on earth was happening there.
Sure. And in terms of last year, I mean, I will also say I was not able to get very in-depth as
course.
Amy and I
You
were
were
this
there
year
for
because
brand
I
new.
was literally
Yeah.
here for 4 weeks.
No, I think
And,
it's based on what Bob advised you. So the question
Exactly.
is, why did we get that advice? I don't expect you to question his advice, but I'm sure it was just, but it would be interesting to ask Bob, how did you get to that number after the year before it was so high? And I don't know.
Right. And again, it's just unfortunate, and Amy and I, again, can't speak to how those numbers were arrived at, but as we did our research, the insolvency issue wasn't, sort of a one-year issue. We stopped at 2013-14 just because of time constraints at this point during budget development, but that we consistently are seeing that the fund was insolvent year after year as far back as 2013-14. And again, unfortunately, we can't speak to how they were arriving at the premiums and what they were recommending for premiums. We're just trying to do our best in terms of moving forward. We found the problem, but we just want to work with you in terms of moving forward and coming up with a good solution, trying to minimize the impact to the town and the Board of Ed in terms of cost, trying to minimize the impact, to the employee, but at the same time being responsible and, getting premiums to where they need to be, whether that takes us maybe 2 years or 3 years, and also getting the reserve back to a place that, we're more comfortable in terms of a risk level.
I just think it's worth, if you wouldn't mind just talking with him. And maybe there's something he saw that you guys didn't see or that your consultant today didn't see. And maybe there isn't. I mean, I'm sure you're doing things properly. I'm not questioning you, but, it just would be helpful to know, like, what was he seeing that we're now not seeing?
But does it really matter? Because the
Yeah,
numbers
it
are the
really
numbers.
It may matter if it's that he knew something that somehow we've missed.
But
I
he
mean,
was wrong.
Well, I mean, if
We
you
have
look-
the actuals, so that's the problem.
If these are real numbers here, then I like to look at
But
trends.
he was
and-
looking at real
and,
numbers too.
What I see is premiums going up, but not getting to the height of how claims were going up. So everything is going up net negative $3.5 million to the negative
Right.
insolvent, right? So what, I guess without creating a policy this year, I would say that maybe we look at maybe like a 3-year plan. I would think that just demographically, we'll probably see more claims, aging demographic. So maybe, people don't want to see their premiums jump 10, 20% in 1 year. Maybe we take a middle-of-the-road approach, understand that we might have to fund something from the general fund this year, and then increase it again next year. Very much like on the, retirement board, we're looking at notching down the discount rate on our unfunded liability. So, I mean, I might suggest something like that rather than shocking the system and saying, okay, we're gonna get a 21%, premium adjustment. Maybe it's 15, or maybe it's halfway in between.
Yeah, I think we're all saying sort of the same thing, but I'll say the way I think first and foremost, we have to charge the right amount for the premiums to cover our projected claims expense. But since we don't know that, because we don't have a crystal ball, you've got to be in the range of what your consultant says, based on our actual experience, going back, looking at the actual claims experience, same population, and projecting based on healthcare costs and all of the other things that they do, what our projected claims experience would be, low, medium, and high. Take the medium, and be sure so that's where we start. The second thing is, how much do we want to add this year, next year, and the following year to get to a target? And I think Amy and Maria's suggestion of the $934,000 to get to 2.8 interim goal is a good one for this year.
Right.
So I think we're saying that that's scenario 4.
I like scenario 4, but I would actually make the 1.5. I would do scenario 4 with a 1.5 contribution. What would that look like, Maria and Amy? Well, contribute 1.5 to expected reserve contribution. To get us a
Well, it
little
would take
bit
us to
into the
3.3 then? To take us to 3.3 target reserve at the end of the year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
500,
Another
that would get us
$500,000?
closer,
Another $600,000?
about 3.3.
You could, if this board is willing to look at our tax rate collection assumption and budget that out, and I don't know that we are, because we're going to see SALT deduction caps, and we're seeing other pressures, we're seeing reduced state aid. But there's about 800,000 there, and if we did a true up, and at the end of the year, there will be no money left over, saying it now, nothing, no emergencies, nothing during the year, you could budget that, that's 800,000. You could then do some sort of contribution from general fund, either 700,000 from there, or you could do a shared contribution, a little bit, reduce your cash for capital line item, the fund that shall not be named, what is it called again? The non-lapsing fund. A little bit of contribution from there, and a little bit of general fund. So it'd be 800,000 plus, 250, 250, 250, 1,500 plus the 15% increase. Yeah, it's a little bit much, but in the private sector, I don't know. Sean, you can speak to it. A lot of people are seeing big increases in their health. I mean, Bob did mention in 2017 when he spoke to us, this isn't just normal increases, these are changes in some of the laws, so they're going to go up, period. And this would get us there closer. I mean, I think it's at least something we should think about. I know and it's ironic that I'm suggesting this because I want our reserves to be at 15%. But to do a transfer, and then the question is, if we use some of the general fund transfer, are we putting ourselves in an unfavorable position when we go out to bond? Is that advisable to do this year when we have a big bond buy? And I don't know the answer to that, so I would ask you to talk to your bond advisor as to whether that's something that could be advisable or not. But it would still be well above our range, and if we did that, what would our reserves be?
Do you need guidance from us tonight?
The Board of Ed budget as it stands. today.
Right, we
because
don't have to
that's
decide.
another-
Sure. So you,
No, I don't.
All right, hang on, we got
Yes.
two discussions
Sorry,
here.
so you don't need to decide this evening. The Board of Selectmen last night did want to endorse and recommend scenario 1 to you, again, with the understanding that that would require some sort of transfer of about 1.488 million. So when they present to you next Tuesday, their budget will include premium estimates at the 10.44% increase. So again, you don't need to make any decisions tonight. We just wanted to at least bring this to your attention because it is an emerging issue that we are diligently working on.
Because I would like to just have see their presentation first and see what other
Board of
budget,
Selectmen's? Yeah,
see what
okay.
other budget
Right.
drivers there
That's fair.
are before
It's
we
in a,
go
yeah,
whole
it's in a
hog
broader,
on.
in a broader context
Yeah.
overall.
Do we know what the average premium paid is?
Sure. So for by town employees?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So town employees, most of our employees are either paying 20% of the premium or 15% of the premium, depending on which plan they're enrolled in.
So that equates to a 20, what does that equate to from a dollar perspective?
I think it's like 20 to 25,000 a year.
They're paying $25,000?
No, that's
Yeah.
how much we're
The
paying.
employer,
much
if
we're-
it's family coverage. Right. Right. And we could bring the rates. If you'd like to see the individual breakdown plan by plan, we can definitely, forward those on to you.
That'd be great.
And the premiums that we did show, that is total. So that's both the employer and the employee contribution that's showing up in those estimated numbers for you.
So I know I've asked you to, but I want to get it on the record. So if we increase this expense ratio, that means that we're going to increase the premiums, which means we'll increase the contributions by the employees.
Employees as well, correct?
So their 20% will be increased. Do we have any contract issues in doing that on a year-to-year basis?
No. So again, our employees pay a share of the premium. So whatever that premium may be, if it's, a 5% increase, a 10% increase, they're paying a share of the premium. If there were a decrease, they would enjoy that decrease in premium. So contractually, at least for the town contracts, that wouldn't have an impact.
Maria, what is the impact on daily lives? Because some of our employees don't make a lot of money, so
Right.
how big an impact is it on them?
Correct. And that was part of the Board of Selectmen's discussion, I think, as well, with scenario 1, is sort of taking into account not only is it our taxpayers and the mill rate, but it's also our workforce as well. And, say, being hit with a 21% increase for some people, that's a lot.
That's why I'd be curious as to what Lisa always likes to refer to it as the cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Tic Tacs, I believe.
So that's why I'm looking for the dollar
Yeah, we could get that for you.
To know what
Touche.
20% actually represents. So
Now it's a box of Joe.
Yeah, we could definitely do that for you. Absolutely.
They're 10
And
years.
if-
Every day.
I see what we say, Dunkin' Donuts, because I can't.
If I might just, I think it's also important too, we're really focused on trying to move forward so we don't find ourselves in this situation again. And if you would indulge me just for a few minutes, I would like to share with you some of the steps and measures that we've taken. So we did switch employee benefits consulting firms this year. We did do a competitive RFQ over the summer. We selected a new firm and we began working with them in October. Something Amy and I had been accustomed to receiving was a monthly claims analysis from our consultants in our prior life. So we have implemented that here. So beginning November, we are now starting to get a monthly analysis of our claims versus projected, month over month, year over year. That's incredibly helpful information because we're staying on top of that monitoring on a monthly basis as our consultants. What we will also be doing, so part of that was getting to this changes in fund balance, spreadsheet. This will be included in your quarterly reports moving forward. So again, we were working towards getting to a place where those quarterly budget status reports we've implemented, you will now be able to see that on a quarterly basis. The Board of Selectmen will be seeing that on a quarterly basis. I think that regular and frequent monitoring is going to be, again, critical to ensure that we don't find ourselves in this position again. We've also began the process to market our stop-loss insurance. I do think there's a very good chance, as do our consultants, that we could potentially do better. It's a pretty aggressive market right now in the sense that we could probably see better premiums. They're marketing that for us. We'll have the results of that in April. So if there are substantial savings to be had, that's something that we could certainly do is change providers for our stop-loss insurance. We've also been doing an extensive analysis of our plan design with our consultants. At least on the town side, I'll be entering into negotiations this spring and summer with 5 of our 6 collective bargaining groups. We do think particularly, what we're really seeing driving our claims right now, it's specialty medications, which have greatly helped people's quality of life, but they're very expensive. We're not actually seeing major increases in the medical spend. It really is the RX spend. And so looking at potentially about 5 to 6 different ways that we could change how our plan is administered around the RX spend, that potentially could save the plan an upwards of 6 figures. So we will be having conversations with our union groups about the fund, the trouble that the fund is having, and how that those could be meaningful changes, some of which might not have a very significant impact on folks. It sometimes could be as simple as implementing, it's a mandatory generic. Your prescription gets filled as a mandatory generic unless you have an allergy or a demonstrated medical need. That's a good way to save dollars. That has pretty minimal impact on people.
We don't have that now.
We don't. So those are some of the types of things that we'll be talking about with our union groups and trying to negotiate those plan design changes. Again, because we understand that the part of the solution isn't just simply increasing premiums. We also have to look at cost containment measures. And so we have, begun and initiated some of those steps now.
Maria, have you done, I know Hartford just did that, an audit of, who's eligible to receive insurance. I know when Hartford did it, they found a lot of people who had been divorced were still receiving it, or children beyond age 26. So, 1, how many people are in this? And 2, is that something, I don't remember, since I've been on the board, that having been done. It may have been done more, I don't know if you remember. But is it time to do that?
Sure.
And does it make sense to do that?
Sure. So a claims audit, my experience, would typically probably run a pool our size about $40,000 to do. And we could direct them to do things looking at actual claims paid, membership, et cetera, but that would probably be a cost, my guess would be of around $40,000 to do such an audit. And I don't know when, maybe Burke might know when the last time was we did that.
I know that probably 6-7 years ago, there was an extensive talk about that. I have a vague recollection that we ended up sort of saying the price was
Not
a
worth
bit
it.
high to hire the consultant, and kind of did our own internal upstairs, downstairs review of.
How many people are in the combined health plan?
The total lives is, let's see,
700.
high 6 to 7, about 700. Yeah.
That's lower than I would have thought.
We were between 6, the low.
Is that subscribers or
The low
lives?
was about 690, and the high was about 702.
Is that subscribers or lives?
That is the employee number, so I
Right,
believe
that's
That would be the
subscribers.
insured, right?
that's the insured number.
But we can get the covered lives number for you.
Maybe we've already, we should see what
Oh, there it is.
breakout
Got about
is.
1880 for covered lives.
Yeah.
Because
I like it.
2.5.
Yeah, it's usually 2 point something.
Right.
Can you do a breakout between employer-employee contributions on these lines?
Yeah. You could.
Because the increase is in aggregate, right? So it would be interesting to see what the percentage increase is actually for the employee versus the employer.
Well, the percentage increase would be the same. It's really that sort of take home, that dollar
Yeah, right, the
impact on a
dollar,
weekly
yeah, the
basis, but
dollar.
we could certainly do that.
So that's not, okay. So
And what
it's-
we did do for you in this chart, and again, because it's evolving, we haven't included the Board of Ed yet, but there's a line here that does show with scenario 1, 2, 3, and 4, what the additional town general fund impact would be. And this, again, was net of the BOE contribution, and this was from what I had proposed at the 9%. And so we can also run those similar numbers for the Board of Ed and include that in this chart for you, just so you would have a true sort of appreciation of, okay, both town and board all in, what would we be looking at, for a 14.48% increase as a for example.
So the town side doesn't take a disproportionate share of that?
Right.
Okay.
And then, in terms of mill rate impact, assume it's the budget that you guys discussed on Monday and that we don't cut it, which I think is a very big assumption. And Board of Ed, assume it's 2-3, that we aren't cut it. Again, a huge assumption there. And this scenario 1 versus scenario 4, what does that do to our mill rate?
Sure. Sure. So when we took a look at it, it was, oh gosh, sorry, with the assumption rate we used, looking at a 2.5% overall increase to the Board of Ed budget, but that was still at their 9% premium increase. With the Board of Selectmen last night at the 10.44, with the budget they advanced, with the debt service increase, teachers' retirement system increase, it's significant. I think it was about a 1.4.
I can pull it up.
About 1.4 mils, and again, 0.4 of that alone was debt service.
She said
No, but how much is just interested in the help?
37 something.
We can run those
Yeah,
numbers.
it would be
Yeah.
helpful next time when you present to bring the mill worksheets.
Yeah, we do have the mill worksheet.
Oh, you guys are good.
Yeah.
So that would be helpful. And then Maria, I don't know if you guys did, and Eric, I think you mentioned that you didn't prioritize your capital. So when you present to us, can you please have that prioritized list in case we do need to cut to help offset some of the health contribution? That would be helpful.
Maybe Alpha's going out the,
That's my question.
no, maybe it is. About the bond a year.
Rob, do we need to make a motion to request that? We had asked that at the tri-board. Do you need that as a motion, Maria, or is that?
To do
something-
what?
To prioritize their capital in case we want to cut the capital list. They always do that.
Moved and seconded.
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You know what, without the Board of Ed insurance numbers, I can only plug in the town to show the mill rate impact.
Will be.
So just wait.
So we can just wait until.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll wait
Yeah.
until next week.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Will you be sending over the mill rate worksheet sometime?
Amy and I'll be working on that, and then we'll share it with the board, all right?
A couple days before.
Huh?
A couple days before we'll have it.
That morning?
That after.
Well, at least 15 minutes. Good. Well, there's been a lot of moving pieces here.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
that's what I'm
And
asking.
there will be more before we meet with you guys
And
next Tuesday.
Is the debt service increase, is that because of Henry James?
No.
No,
that
that's
doesn't even
not
include
because
it.
of Henry James. So that's straight because of interest rates.
That's from past projects that were
Past
bonded.
projects.
It's the same chart that we've been looking at before.
Yep.
Yeah. This might be a great segue into the next topic, unless there
It
were
is,
additional
yeah.
questions on health insurance.
No, please, segue.
Okay.
Before we all need health insurance, right?
Okay.
Want to take it since you did such a good job yesterday?
Let me just grab that. They have this in their packet.
Yes. Can you just preface that this is the one that was presented to the Board of Selectmen based on your budget and not their budget?
Yes. Okay. So I believe in your packet, we've provided for you a few different scenarios. And this, again, was sort of an emerging issue that we wanted to bring to your attention. We did raise this with the Board of Selectmen. Again, as we were working through budget, Amy and I had some concerns about challenges with the existing debt service and capital budget model. And so the first chart, which our understanding is that you have not traditionally seen the capital model with sewer debt, but we do think, at least on an annual basis, that's something that we should bring to you so you can see that, have an awareness of it. Ultimately, if for some reason the sewer enterprise fund was not able to make its debt service payments, that debt is still town debt. So ultimately, if you will, the general fund, the mill rate would have to be raised to make those debt service payments. So at least
Or
on
the
an,
sewer fees would have to be raised.
or the sewer fees would have to
They
be
have their own
raised.
revenue system, so I
Right,
don't think
right.
it needs to go in here.
But again, it's something that I think on an annual basis, it'll be helpful for you just to see what we have for sewer debt. And also, as you're working on your debt management policy, a recommendation we would have is that there should be some conversation around, for that particular enterprise fund, sort of a debt service level that folks feel comfortable with. So that should, again, that's just a recommendation from us as you move forward on your debt management policy to not forget about the sewer debt. If you go to the next chart, this is showing our projected and current debt service without sewer debt. And so that blue line is the 6.7% target line. And again, the challenge, or a significant challenge that we believe we're seeing here, is that for about a 6-year period, there is absolutely no room to use cash to pay for capital needs. And that's, again, concerning when you think about our sort of our baseline capital needs. And we'll go to the next chart. And so what we've been working on doing is trying to quantify what, in fact, are our baseline capital needs. So oftentimes these are the routine capital needs. These are items traditionally or typically that we really shouldn't be bonding for. And what we're doing is we're trying to quantify it into 7 broader categories. One is our paving. One is our sidewalks. Another, it is our bike trails. Another category, it's our town buildings. We have our school buildings, our fleet, and our parks and recreation facilities. So those are sort of the 7 major categories that we know and can reasonably expect we're going to have, again, these routine or baseline capital needs. So what we implemented this year for the CNR fund is starting to budget and plan on a 6-year basis, because part of this model, it was not including those smaller value capital needs. That was not part of this model. It was those large projects you'd be bonding for, but it didn't include those smaller capital needs. And we weren't looking at smaller capital needs more than just every year coming up. And what was happening and what we found as we've started to, and it'll be in your budget book, is that when we start really looking out at a 6-year need for those smaller valued items, say $250,000 and less, is we had a lot of smaller dollar value items that are just mounting and piling up, particularly when we were only looking at things in a 1-year snapshot. So partly what you'll be seeing now is the CNR fund will also have a 6-year sort of plan or projection for what those needs are. And there are a lot of needs. And just a few for examples, we have a couple of significant needs at the ice rink that are coming up. They have a couple of mechanical systems that are over $100,000 each, 20 years old at the end of their useful life, and one, in fact, was actually refurbished when we bought it 20 years ago. That was not showing up anywhere in our capital plan because we weren't budgeting the CNR for 6 years out. So that was, again, a flaw we saw with the system. We are trying to course correct and try to better plan for those needs. We are in the process, we have engaged in some studies to help quantify what those baseline needs are. We have a couple of additional studies that are currently underway that will help frame that understanding. One is our Parks and Open Space Master Plan, the School Facilities Master Plan that's currently underway, and the town does have funding for a Town Facilities Master Plan. We just completed our sidewalk assessment. That study is available online, and for a period of years, to bring our sidewalks into good condition, we would need about $300,000 a year over about a 7-year period, and then an additional $80,000 a year over an additional about 7 to 8 year period. And that would take care of our sidewalks as well as all of our ramps, in part to bring those into ADA compliance. Paving management, we have a very good solid number. So right now we feel really good about our paving number and our sidewalk number. Again, some of those other pieces with the studies underway, we're hoping this time next year we will have a very good understanding. So for now, just a very, very rough preliminary projection of sort of those baseline needs is about $2.5 million.
Maria, does that baseline need include CNR, the plow truck, and police vehicles?
Correct.
So that's $1 million that were in our operating budget. So I know that we've changed it, so it's not truly above the line. And in fact, if you keep them in the operating budget, you can just take those out. Remember, part of the reason you're seeing the crush in capital and the backlog is because we put the plow truck in CNR and we put the police vehicles in CNR, which meant there was only $150,000 for everyone else in town for 10 years. So you were missing 10 vehicles or 10 pieces of equipment a year. So we're about 100 vehicles or pieces of equipment behind because we did that. So that course correction, and I'm tipping my hand to my colleagues that I'm going to recommend that we pull the police vehicles out of CNR and put it back into operating. And so I would just recommend that we think of the plow truck as an operating expense. We think of the police vehicles as an operating expense so that they're not in competition for the other capital that we've seen. And that will free up 416 in the CNR so you can do the two Culture Parks and Rec 100,000 pieces. It's the same as one plow truck. So you will have a lot more freedom to do that. So when you say cash for capital, I would just maybe think about, and TAR has always been 360, right? And there is a 9-year plan for that. And so that shouldn't be included in that line because we've never included that. And so it will give you more capacity. I was talking with Rob at one point, a couple of things that could happen. We're at a 6.7 debt service line, we've always been at 7. If we raise that, that will give you capacity. And for heaven's sakes, this year, if you're really coming in with a 3% increase, this budget line is going to go up as well, instead of a 2.5 that we've assumed. So you all have more cash capacity. So in some of the ways, it may not get you 100% there, but it will get you on your way. So, but when you think of above the line stuff, I'm not sure I would include TAR, the truck, police vehicles, and CNR, because those we've always viewed as operating. Now, I understand it's sort of a, an accounting thing. It doesn't really matter, but I think that's sort of obfuscating above the line stuff, because that's really already baked into your operating budget. So you don't need to include it over here.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure if you mean TAR, like the Town
Town
Aid
Aid Road,
Road.
yeah.
But we went through this whole, and maybe you
Yeah.
can help me recreate it, because it's been a few years. You'll remember
Yeah,
it, too. Former member of the board, Barbara Pettigene, had this pet peeve about paving. And, not wanting it in capital. And we did a lot of work to sort of catch it up so that it was on a 17-year, if I'm remembering correctly. Even, whatever it was, $1 million something a year. I believe that was in the operating
Yes.
budget.
No, it was
Not
750
in the
in
operating
capital.
budget.
Bonding,
In
so,
She
capital,
wanted it
okay.
in the operating.
Yeah.
That's right. She wanted an operating, but it was an even amount. So you're talking about like we have these paving as though it wasn't ever recognized in the baseline needs. It was like already
Bonded.
recognized.
Most of it was being bonded every other year for $850,000.
750. I think originally, maybe now it's 850. But my point is, what
But
Barbara,
we made the decision that we couldn't afford to stop bonding for that.
So
And we
it's-
couldn't put that into
That's right.
right.
cash.
So I would say it's like,
So why would we stop now?
it's like buying a car, right? You can buy a car. If you need to buy a car, you have two choices. You can finance it, and you pay $250 a month, right? Or you can spend $30,000, and you don't have any monthly payments, and hooray! And it's cheaper in the long term if you do that. But if you're putting the kids through college, if you're paying for childcare, if you're doing all this, you don't have the month to month. So because in 1990, this is not even our board, they did pavement management bonded. To switch that to paying cash is a huge mill rate impact. I know when Barbara came to me and she goes, Lisa, we're going to do it this year. I'm really excited. And she goes, but just cut your budget $750,000 so that we don't impact the mill rate. I was like, I can't do that. And so that's why it never happened, because it was just too
Speed up
expensive
cost.
to do the shift. I agree that if we were all starting, I think Rob and I have said, if we were all starting this budget process from the beginning, we might have done it differently. But the 90s happened. And so that's where, and you see that crush over here. I mean, you're not going to be able to pay cash for paving further down the line without increasing the mill rate, unless we increase it to 7% and, unless we take some other steps.
And so, part of our goal in developing the budget was to sort of do our best to try to start breaking the cycle of bonding for everything. Because again, if we have no cash at all over the next 6 years, that is just creating a perpetual cycle of bonding. So in those out years, what little cash is available is now suddenly gone. So we suddenly, again, have this cycle of bonding. And so that was, I think, one thing that we worked really diligently at is, okay, if we assumed level funding, cash for capital, but looking at our capital needs and looking at it holistically in terms of how could we best maybe try and pay for everything in cash. So if under the Board of Selectmen proposed budget that will be coming to you, it would be cash for the town capital projects. That would be the second consecutive year in a row of paying for cash for the town capital projects. In regards to the paving, I would say that, doing a major reconstruction, and that really is something that would be, bonding would be appropriate. But fortunately, with the investment in our roads, we're now at a standard of maintenance. So that standard of maintenance is about a $1.3 million investment. And again, but that's routine maintenance as opposed to major reconstruction where you're, bringing the road down.
I don't disagree with you as a best practice. I'm just saying because the 90s
Right.
happened, we
Right.
can't afford to do that. I mean, it's better for me to buy the car for $40,000, but I can't do it. I got to put down $1,000 and pay $250 a month if you look at our residents. So that's just a policy call for us to make. I don't disagree with you that if we were starting from scratch, 100% agree, 100%. And if there's a way we can afford it, you'll have my full support. In fact, I suggested that when we had the $2.5 million, but our board felt appropriately so that they wanted to give some tax relief back to the residents because we were the tension going on with the state. So that was an appropriate policy call that the board made. And it was a tough call because we could have done that then. So we've looked at it twice and rejected it twice. Doesn't mean we can't do it and doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do because I actually agree with you that it is. And I agree with Barbara Pettigene that it is. We've just never been able to figure out a way we can do it that's affordable to our residents.
I'm sorry, clarify the other point.
I've already lost it.
About the CNR and moving things out of CNR into operating.
Oh, so when you asked if the police vehicles and the plow truck are included as part of CNR, they're actually not in the proposed budget. They're included as part of a transfer from the general fund into capital. So those items would be paid for cash. So that 416 is included for other projects. And actually included in this plan is we went through and made like slight increases to paying for cash for capital items throughout the next 6 years. And these items in the striped lines would be anything above that. So we already have the paving in there as being paid for cash. We already have other town projects that we could use town aid road for. So this item above the line for those studies that aren't finished, that's real live money that we haven't accounted for that would have to be debt. And to your point about like the vehicle, absolutely it makes more sense to have that lower monthly payment. But if you keep buying vehicle after vehicle after vehicle, and you're still paying for that one vehicle when you're still buying more vehicles,
No,
that's
I
where
agree.
the issue comes in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The only thing is, I'm glad you did pull out the police vehicle, but that's technically an increase to the operating budget, right, if you do that?
Well, we left the cash for capital flat, and that was included as part of that.
There is no cash for capital, so I'm not sure what you mean. Tell me what you mean by that. Yeah.
There's a line in the budget that, actually, I didn't change it from last year, actually says cash for capital. So that's where it's included. I believe it was like 1.741 last year.
But that was new last year. We've never had a cash
We
for
had never had
capital
that before,
line. So,
Right, but in our guidance, we were allowed to keep it flat, so that's still there. So that's what's paying for that.
so I think we talked, yeah,
Yeah,
I think that was.
that's a failure of communication
Yeah.
probably, because the cash for capital, when we first started doing it, especially in large dollars, was because we had the capacity under the debt service, because the high school fell off, and we decided to go ahead and spend the money on items rather than bond them. But with the junior high school and the other items we're buying, then the actual debt service itself jumps right back up in 2021,
Which consumes, yeah.
so that there isn't the gap to
Yes.
use.
There
So
isn't that cash for capital.
it's not like we always have had $1.5 million of cash for capital. It was something we implemented just 2 or 3 years ago to fill in the gap below the line,
Just to smooth that line.
smooth the gap.
And it's to smooth the mill rate, because you can either, if you have a big drop-off, you can go, hooray, tax holiday, everybody's paying less, and then next year, psych, it's coming right back up.
Jump.
And rather than doing that, you could take that opportunity with the gap to fill needs.
But I do understand completely your desire to try
Yes.
to wean ourselves off of bonding. And the way you do that is either wean, and we're saying it's going to be very hard to do that, or you fund it and do it with reserves, or we have a,
target.
what, or just increase, we're going to pay for it with a mill rate adjustment to get to the point. So I really appreciate the effort to do this, what we buy every year, where it's classified now, capital or operating, and let's try to figure this out next week with, and that's what you're trying to do with this. I don't want to get hung up on where the 6.7 line is and how it's drawn. I want to, we know what the debt is that we've already incurred. We know what the debt is that we have to incur to pay for the middle for Henry James. And outside of that, then we'll have a choice of whether we buy stuff on a go-ahead basis or we bond for it. But I'd like your recommendation of how we get to where you want to be, other than just show it above the line. So, I mean, how,
Maria has recommendations.
okay.
So,
You want to give us the recommendations?
sure. So, one way possibly to somewhat dig ourselves out of this is to be really disciplined when we have good years of new growth. A prior community I had worked in, we had a similar problem. We when I say we, myself and the manager I worked with had sort of inherited a situation where Cash for Capital had been funded actually with Pequot Mohegan money, and there was absolutely no money from the general fund going towards it. And then the Pequot Mohegan grant revenues that were in excess of $2 million dried up, and suddenly we had absolutely no cash for capital projects. And it was really just slowly and incrementally we determined what our baseline needs were, got a handle of what that number was, and it was gradually sort of working on building up that cash contribution. And we did that mostly through new growth. So again, we were really disciplined in the sense of, as tempting as it is to, massively expand services or to add to your infrastructure, we really focused on maintaining what we had and using the new growth revenue as opposed to putting pressure on the mill rate or increasing the mill rate, but really using that new growth to really do two things. One was to fund Cash for Capital, and the other was to build up our fund balance. And we were extremely careful and selective about any service improvements that were actually advanced, as well as, again, not adding to the infrastructure, but really focusing on what we had and doing a good job of maintaining what we had. And so it took about a decade to dig out of that, but we ended up in a really good place, and we're basically not bonding for anything unless it was something really substantial that, was going to, say, perhaps have a shelf life of 25 years or something of that nature. And we were able to sort of break that cycle and to get on a good track.
All right, so you when you say new growth, you're talking about grand list growth.
Grand list growth, right. And I do believe something we presented at the budget workshop is that for what was in the ground for October 1, we're not going to see significant grand list growth for the 1920 budget. But I do believe there's good potential for the 2021 and 21-22 budget based on projects that are, sort of in the pipeline in terms of, what we might reasonably anticipate in terms of services versus those projects and some grand list growth. So there may be some opportunities in, say, year 2 or 3 from now to really potentially tap into that new growth to maybe perhaps help with the Cash for Capital issue. Again, without putting pressure on the mill rate.
But historically, the grand list growth has been what enabled us to even just grow the operating budget. So it's not like there's been enough grand list growth. It's not like we've been building lots of new things.
Some of us that remember when our grand list went down by a lot.
Right.
Some certain company left town.
Right.
But that.
Well, our interest income.
What?
In 2008, when we lost our interest income too,
Yeah.
that was $1 million.
Yeah.
And we're going to see, we're seeing decreases in state aid, so the grand list growth may actually have to offset the decrease in state aid. So we may not have that as an option. I don't disagree that that's, David's projections that he gave us on grand list growth over the next few look pretty dismal. Maybe
Pretty
those
what?
were pretty dismal.
Right. He tends to be fairly conservative.
He
in his
does.
estimates.
I get that, but my point is, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just looking at the state budget and knowing that cuts are coming our way. And this board has always felt that our mill rate is not competitive with our neighbors, and if we're not going to continue the focus on the mill rate, but that's a policy call, and we can make that call. I guess it's out there, but that's sort of one of the things we've always looked at and we've weighed, and so it weighs on me heavily here, because any mill rate increase that's above whatever the COLA is means somebody's not getting their groceries, somebody's not getting their medicine. And so...
All right, so what's our action plan here? I'm still trying to get my head around this, because we're really not talking, when we say Cash for Capital and the numbers you're throwing out, we're not really talking about buying stuff we're not already buying. It's just today, we're buying them and paying for them with bonds. We're
Right.
using bond as a source of revenue rather than tax revenue, basically. Is that?
Right. And again, we just wanted to bring this to your attention. This is an issue for us that was of concern. Again, when we were looking at, a debt service payment alone, the increase, not even the aggregate, but just the increase alone this year is a 0.4 mil increase. And when you're looking at, that over a period of time, and again, this was just an issue of concern for us after we did our analysis, and again, just wanted to at least raise an awareness with you, and hopefully in the long term, our hope would be that we could find some solutions to build into our budget Cash for Capital. I mean, ideally, what I think would be good to see is our Cash for Capital and our debt service in aggregate below that line.
Just how it's always been, yeah.
But again, that means slowly weaning ourselves off of bonding for projects.
So I would just say, could we get a chart on debt per capita in comparison to other towns? Because actually our debt per capita, if you go on the OPM comparison thing, is very good. In terms of, it may be more, you're coming from a place that didn't have any debt, but in the Farmington Valley, our per capita debt, at least for the prior years was, I think, I don't know, 1,400, and some of the others, I think Glastonbury was like 1,700. So we were well within the norm of our comparison towns. So that's a policy call, because some people, like if you look at GASB, sometimes they'll say, well, for intergenerational equity, you do want to have some debt and not have just one group do it. So I don't know the answer to that, and I'm open to it. I live my life, I try not to do debt on a personal level, but it's a little different when you're a governmental entity and thinking about intergenerational equity. So it's interesting. That's what makes this job interesting. What makes your job interesting is we sort of grapple with that. But I think that if you could get them below, and I'm willing to go to the 7%, I don't know if the rest is, but that would be ideal. That would make us all very, very happy if that could be accomplished.
So I'm still trying to figure out what we need to do tonight, next Tuesday night, to get ready for a public hearing on the collective budgets, which is scheduled for when? April.
I believe the public hearing is April 2nd. I'd have to double check April 2nd. And again, next Tuesday night would be the board presenting their recommended budget to you.
It's not a lot, but it's.
Okay.
And then do we have a working session after that?
Well,
Of just us?
we will have our meeting, which is also open to the public, as all of them are, but
Right.
it will be right after the
After their board of selectmen.
It's more than CPI.
So the question is, can we accomplish this further discussion of the debt service and capital at our meeting next Tuesday?
Yeah, I think
And then be
so.
ready, we'll know at the end of next week whether we'll be ready for so we have to recommend both budgets and the capital budget to the hearing
Right.
by when?
Oh, that date.
The budget calendar's in there.
Yeah, sorry, we have the budget calendar, 1 second.
But that's, I mean, the hearing isn't set. We can change the hearing date if we need to. I hope we don't, but
You have to approve a budget 10 days after the public hearing. But if you choose to have a second public hearing, then the 10 days would be from the
Right.
second public hearing.
But so the date for the public hearing is set or can be moved?
It's
be
set.
moved.
I mean, we're pretty constrained.
no, it
Okay.
can be moved.
Well, with the charter requirements, it's pretty tight.
It's by April 8th or 10th that you have to have a public hearing, but I think we get into school vacation week, so we always end up doing it.
Oh, the
Right.
public hearing, but the referendum date can be moved by keeping the hearing open.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
Right,
think
that's what she
tentatively
said.
we had flagged May.
All right, so we're gonna have this meeting on the 2nd of April, the public hearing.
Right.
And so when do we have to take action to recommend the budgets to the public hearing?
We have to publish it 5 days before.
5 days before. So that, okay.
And you're presenting to us next week on the.
On the
Next
19th.
Tuesday.
Yeah. All right. All right, we'll get this done. We need to, yeah, I need some work to do on the mill rate worksheet, and all of that. Collective we, Amy, always. But,
Yes.
yeah. All right.
You-
Do we have anything else we need to do?
I would just say, does Matt and Burke have any questions? Because you're going, I mean, anything?
Yeah, maybe we give a sense of where we are from this,
Right.
this meeting. So I think we need you guys to look at I need Matt and Burke to look at the Board of Ed budget in light of the discussion around the insurance fund using scenario 4 and see what that impact would be
For the operating costs.
to your operating budget, all right? Heads up that we're going to need a source of funds to get to a target, and the non-lapsing account would be a prime target for that. We, as always, ask you to take a sharpened pencil to anything you think you might be able to do with the updated news about the retirement. Very good. But it'd be nice to have, to come in around that net 2 offset using the, I don't know what the dollar impact of the insurance thing is. You guys will have to run that through so we can talk. But, try to come in as close to the 2 as you can with all of that, just by sharpening your pencil, using the non-lapsing account to bring down, for the insurance primarily, and to see if there's any other place you can. And then we'll listen next week for your guys' budget, and we'll have a wholesome discussion around debt service and and the impact on mill rate next week.
Yes. The only thing I would like to add is I think it warrants a discussion for the Board of Finance to discuss kind of the regionalization of schools, and if we're still comfortable spending $25 million on a Henry James project with, I think we wouldn't be acting as fiduciaries if we didn't have that discussion.
So that'll be on the agenda
Is
as
it
well.
possible to rescind that, or
when
is
is
it
that
already a done
conversation?
deal?
Well,
I don't know that we have any option
Right.
because the,
Well,
already
we
got
haven't
voted
bonded
on.
for it, though, have we?
Yeah, but it
no,
got
but
voted on.
we're
I mean, I don't-
we're
I don't-
signing contracts and we have taxpayer
on.
vote.
That cow is
Right,
out
no,
of
I
the barn.
understand it's been voted on, but I don't know if we still would, it makes sense for us acting as fiduciaries to have a discussion, because if this, one of the proposals gets through, right, the taxing entity starts in October of this year. So I think it still is our responsibility, at least have a discussion if we're comfortable with it.
You should talk to the legislature too, because it's not even out of committee yet, and they're.
No,
Yeah, so
I understand that. I
So
just-
maybe we could just ask Bob DiCrescenzo what the
Right,
legal
that would be.
options
Right,
are
that's a-
for
that's a-
consideration.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, we could certainly consult with Bob. I mean, I will say that because the project was approved by the voters and the public committee,
Totally, yeah.
building committee moved forward, and I've already signed,
Yeah.
some contracts, so there are already, funds
I just think,
committed.
I think the residents would expect us to look into it, that's all. And asking Bob his opinion would be appropriate.
Yeah. All right.
Is there anything else?
Anything else?
Move to
Marching
adjourn.
orders? Looking
Any other
for,
questions
I did,
for
I made a
Mayor?
motion to adjourn.
So
A
moved.
second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, guys.
So regionalization includes
It's not-